Hello guys, welcome back to the final section of the first week course on SQL for data analytics. Now in this section we want to learn how to create databases. Okay, so we'll learn how to create a server client database or a server database. That is database that is created in a server and an an offline, or how do I call that, serverless database. Yeah, so database that is created outside the server. Okay, so when we say a server is just you creating database in a part in a cloud or in a cloud like structure that can be connected by anyone, right? Creating a database in a server that can be connected by any person. So when you create a database in a server or in a cloud, every one of you in the classroom can connect to that database. Okay, all you need are just the credentials to get connected. Okay, but when you create an offline database, it is database in your computer using the database management system, only you would have access to that database. You can't share any login details to anyone to get connected. Okay, the only thing you can do is to share the file. You can send the database to someone else's computer via email or any other means to get them connected. But if you have, but in practice, like in real world, when you get into the industry, databases are actually created in the server. Okay, so that multiple people can have access to those databases, and as data is being entered, is getting stored into the databases as they do that, as they enter data. Okay, so here we want to learn how to create database in the server and database outside the server. All right, so let's jump into the classroom, and that is the fifth content: how to create a database. Before we learn about creating database, let's even go through some very important points to note when creating a database. All right, so creating a database involves several steps, including designing database schema. Okay, what schema? I guess this must be a new word to most of you. You'll learn about schema as you continue. Selecting a database management system, and then implementing the database. So here is a general overview of the process involved in creating a database. Number one, you want to define the purpose and scope. Okay, so if you are in that position where you ask to create a database, so what is the purpose and what's the scope of the database? Now, in determining these two broad areas, you have to first define the purpose of a database. So what kind of data will it store? What are your goals and objectives? So get these questions answered, okay, to be able to define the purpose of a database. And then identify the scope of the database. So will this be used for personal or small scale projects, or will it serve as an enterprise level application? So if you're using it for just a personal personal stuff, like I said, it's either you can create it locally or you can create it in a server, depending on what you want to do with it. If it's for small scale projects, definitely it wants to be in a server, or if it's an enterprise level application, it must be a database created in a server. Okay, next is to plan the database schema. So what's a schema? We'll talk about schema shortly, but for now, just have it at the back of your mind or in your head that you have to plan the database schema. So identify the entities. Okay, that is, in planning the database schema, first you have to identify the entities. Determine the main entities or objects that will be represented in the database. For instance, if you're creating a database for school, the entities would include students, teachers, and courses. So in fact, to keep things simple, entities here simply means tables. So when you're creating a schema, a database schema, one of the things that makes up the database schema are tables. So you have to determine what tables do I want in that database. Okay, so any database you're creating, think about the tables. So for the example I cited here is an example of a school's database. It will have things like tables like students table, teachers table, courses table, and so on and so forth. The next component of a schema is the definition of relationship. Now you have to identify relationship between entities, identify relationship between tables. So how do I connect these tables? Okay, for example, a student entity or a student table may have a relationship with a course entity through enrollment. Yes, student table will be connected to course table because students will enroll for these courses. So you find a way to make connect these relationships. Next, establish attributes. So determine the attributes or properties that describe each entity. So when I say attributes here, I mean the columns that make up the tables in the database. For example, a student entity or a student table may have the attributes or columns like name, age, grade, and so on and so forth. So these are different attributes or columns that will make up the student table. So you have to establish the columns or attributes that should be found in each table. All right. So the next component of creating a database is selecting a database management system. So depending on what database or what kind of database you're working with, select the right one. So choose a suitable database management system based on your requirements. All right, some popular options include MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, and MongoDB. So depending on if it's going to be a relational database or a non-relational database. Okay, consider factors like scalability, performance, security, and programming language or framework you'll be using. All right, so then you want to implement the database. So go ahead, install and set up the selected database management system in your computer or server. So please note, you can run a database management system either from your computer, a local PC, or from the server. So once it is installed in the server or computer, then next you use that DBMS provided tools or database administration tool to create a new database. So shortly, in fact, the next video, you see how to create a database from a server. So we're going to use a free website. It is called freesqldatabase.com. Okay, so we're going to use that to learn how to create a database from a server. And then there's also an administration tool. In that particular video, you see the administration tool is called PHP My Admin. PHP My Admin. That is the tool, the administration tool that you would use to create database and manipulate the server database. The next step is to define the tables. So create tables in the database based on the entities you've identified in the schema design phase. Now each table represents an entity, just like I said, and each column represents an attribute. I mentioned this earlier. Next step is to define relationships and constraints. Set up relationships between tables using primary and foreign keys. So quickly, a primary key is any column that uniquely identifies the entries in a table, while a foreign key is that primary key from table A that is introduced in table B. So if the unique identifier in table A is being introduced in table B it will be referred to as a foreign key, while in table A it will be called the primary key. You see more of those as you go into the practical part of this lesson. Okay, next, to establish constraints to enforce data integrity, such as unique constraints or not null constraints. So these constraints are the constraints that you assigned or you identify or you set for each column. For instance, for primary keys, columns that are set as primary keys, they must have not null constraints. So it shouldn't contain a null value. Null value means empty value. So that means there must be something for each row in such kind of column. So this is what is referred to as constraints. So you have to enforce constraints to these columns. Next, optimize the database. Fine-tune the database configuration and the performance settings according to your needs. Okay, and the next step is to assess and manage database, test and maintain database schema. So what is database schema? I said I was going to talk about this briefly. So a database schema is a logical structure that defines the organization, relationships, and constraints of a database. So it defines how is a database organized, how are the relationships formed, and what are the constraints that make up this database. So it acts as a blueprint or design for the database and determines how data is stored, organized, and assessed with the system. So a schema provides a framework for creating tables, defining their columns and data types, establishing relationships between tables, and enforcing integrity rules. So these are the components that make up a schema. Now, very shortly, you see schemas in our database, the databases we're going to be creating in this course. All right, so that brings us to the end of this section. how to create a database. So the videos that follow, which will explain how to create database in the server and outside and in at the local PC. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you again in week 2. I'm super excited, and I hope you're enjoying this course so far. All right, thank you once more for choosing DataFight Academy. See you in the next one. Goodbye.